It seems like every time I look at any news feeds, there is another story about someone causing harm to an animal, either intentionally or by what we often see referred to as neglect. Well, my guest tonight decided to not only create a program to prevent this never ending slew of animal cruelty cases, but also to change the way people who harm animals view and treat them. This is going to be really interesting tonight, so get comfortable and join us. Come on, you doggies, won't you walk with me? I'm the puppet dog. Hi there, I'm Angela Webb, the Animal Intuitive. This is the Animal Intuitive Show. We give animals a voice here through animal communication, natural pet care, and interviews with experts in the fields of animal care and advocacy. I'm a professional animal communicator, and but tonight, and often we do live animal communication, but tonight we have a special guest I'm very excited about. Um, so, uh, our guest this evening has an incredible background in animal protection and welfare. Deborah Knaan is an attorney who has worked in a variety of roles, including having headed up and created the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office first animal cruelty prosecution program. It's a program that has served as a model for other prosecuting agencies throughout the country, and Ms. Knaan has authored several pieces of animal protection state legislation. She trained many prosecutors, law enforcement, and animal control officers throughout the United States on how to investigate, file, and prosecute cases in which animals have been mistreated and abused. She was regularly called upon to consult in cases of animal cruelty that occurred in parts of California. And additionally, she created a curriculum on animal cruelty, which is taught in fifth grade classrooms by prosecutors. It's part of a nationally recognized law-related education program called Project LEAD. Ms. Knaan is frequently invited to speak at professional conferences, to agencies, to groups that play a critical role in recognizing, reporting, or investigating animal cruelty cases. She was also featured in a book, Citizen Canine, Our Evolving Relationship with Dogs and Cats. She was a member of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys Animal Cruelty Advisory Panel and served as the executive director of the Susie Specter Foundation, which was a non-for-profit organization whose mission was to raise awareness and inspire change through education about the humane and appropriate treatment of animals. So, all that being said, I also want to just quote Sharon Papa, who's the chief of police of Hermosa Beach, California. She's the former assistant chief of police and co-creator of the LA Police Department's Animal Cruelty Task Force. And she was quoted as saying about B.A.R.C, which is the topic we're going to be discussing this evening. It's important that law enforcement be proactive rather than just reactive when it comes to preventing animal cruelty. Until now, law enforcement has lacked a vital tool that will help to reduce the likelihood that a person who has abused an animal will reoffend. The B.A.R.C course, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight, fills a huge void and provides an opportunity to bring about positive and meaningful change. So all that being said, welcome, Deborah. Hi there. So for the next few minutes, you're going to hear Deborah Knaan's voice, but just see me. Unfortunately, something happened and the voice was recording, but her face wasn't. So she will be popping into the interview momentarily, but just bear with us. And I have a nice picture of her up on the screen next to me, though, for a while the voice recording is just on.
Hello, thank you for having me, Ann.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. Deborah, we have a lot to talk about. But first off, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit more about your background, and then we're going to talk about the Benchmark Animal Rehabilitative Curriculum, known as B.A.R.C. And we're also going to have hopefully some time for some Q&A at the end. Please feel free in the chat to add your comments. I know everyone here is really great. We don't have to worry too much about, anyone being out of line or inappropriate, although I know this is a topic that can upset people, so be aware of that if you're watching. But feel free also to ask your questions at the end if you jump in, and if you're watching on the replay, please feel free to leave your comments and questions. We'll do our best to come back and answer those. So, okay, so Deborah, please tell us about your background.
Up until about 9 months ago, I was a prosecutor with Los Angeles County. And during my time there, at some point, I was becoming involved with animals. It all started about 25 years ago when I got my first dog. I did not grow up with animals, and I really didn't know anything about them, and they weren't even on my radar until I got my first dog. And after that, I started really loving them, all kinds of animals. And little by little, I was becoming more involved in animal welfare, just learning about it. I sat on the city commission that oversaw the Department of Animal Services for LA City. That was their animal control. And then I actually also was recruited to go work as the assistant general manager of animal services. So while I was there, I started learning more and more about the different types of animal cruelty cases there were. And I saw that prosecutors really were not aware of the different laws. They're very nuanced and they're very specialized, the laws regarding animal cruelty. And the more I learned about them, the more I realized that I didn't know anything about them. And I found that my fellow prosecutors, through no fault of ours, just because we didn't handle those cases, we really were not aware of the law and the special, legal technicalities that go along with filing those cases and prosecuting them from beginning to end. So I proposed to our office that we create an animal cruelty division. I had heard that there was one actually in New York. So I kind of looked, it was a smaller unit. It wasn't on the scale of what we had. Well, our office was huge. We have 28 offices with the LA County DA's office. It's the largest prosecuting agency in the entire country. So just kind of, doing research, and I proposed that we create a unit that would be specifically dedicated just to prosecuting animal crimes so that prosecutors would get really specialized training in it. And so when an animal case came in, they would know which laws were relevant, what to file, what types of evidence to look for, how to present the case in court. Because again, that's not a typical, we're used to handling robberies and burglaries and all different kinds of cases, but not animal cases.
Mm-hmm.
So my um, decided to accept the proposal, and they allowed me to just put it together, which meant creating policy. We decided that rather than having just a dedicated handful of prosecutors, it would be more effective because the county was so huge that the dedicated handful would have to travel all over the county. So instead, what we decided is to have one prosecutor in every one of our 28 offices who would be the animal cruelty designee. And that designee was specially trained, and any animal related case that came into the office would go directly to that designee. So that's basically, what we did. And
So,
so it
wow.
off from
It sounds like a lot of work. And all inspired. Do you feel like it was just inspired because you got the dog and then it kind of grew from there? Because I mean, in some counties and states, it probably just wouldn't even, people wouldn't go to the efforts that you did to get something like this going on such a large scale.
right. Well, yeah, it did. That ultimately became my awareness or my becoming aware of animals. The
Hmm.
one dog, his name was Ziggy.
Oh,
And Um, yeah, it was a lot of work because we had to put together, a manual and policies and training. And we have regular turnover, so there constantly had to be training for the new designees to keep them, obviously trained to do the cases. But,
right.
and then training all the, we have, I don't know, there were 35, maybe more law enforcement agencies in LA County, and then there are a lot of animal control agencies. So it was making them aware of what we were doing and training them how to put these cases together so that we could file a case. Because, the heart might be willing, but if you're not bringing a prosecutor enough evidence to substantiate a criminal filing, then we cannot file a case. So it was an issue. I mean, we had in one case, for example, um, some civilians had called the police because it was a mobile home park, and one of the residents they said had killed his cat in very very way. So they called the police did go out there, and I remember this was in 2007. So we've advanced a lot
Yeah.
thanks to the efforts of my office and a lot of other prosecutors around the country. And when the police went out, they threw out the body of the cat. and they threw it in the dumpster. And by the time I got the case, it was too late to retrieve the body. So they didn't understand, and a lot of people didn't understand that the body was the evidence. Autopsy, which is the equivalent of a human autopsy, and so if we can't prove cause of death, and the defendant says, well, the cat accidentally fell off the table onto its head and died. Well, how can I disprove that? So it was training all of the law enforcement and all of the animal control officers on what we needed as prosecutors in order to actually file a case. So it was building a foundation on which could stand excellent prosecutions by our office. So it was a really huge combined effort, and all of the law enforcement agencies and the animal control agencies were extremely open to learning and becoming much more adept and more developing expertise in the area of animal crimes. And it was also training the veterinarians. Because, again, there's so many different pieces to prosecuting an animal cruelty case. And it really does take a village, because if any one of those pieces doesn't work, the case just either can't be filed or it's going to fall apart after it is filed.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. When you mentioned how much training goes into it, I was wondering if you got any resistance from the different police departments and just different agencies, not taking it seriously or.
No, even at that point, when we made a point of telling the officers two things. One, the link between animal cruelty and other crimes, and also telling them that, look, if you could go in on an animal cruelty case, for example, a domestic violence case. So a lot of times there's domestic violence and animal cruelty kind of in the same household going on for various reasons. And so what we would tell officers is that domestic violence cases are very hard to prosecute, because a lot of times, for many reasons, the victim does not want to, they initially might cooperate and then they start to recant, or their cooperation falls off. But we tell them that if you've got the animal cruelty case, in addition to the domestic violence, that's a way to get the case together. And if nothing else, you can get the animal cruelty case, and that carries in California up to 3 years in state prison for a felony.
Wow.
So when they realized that animal cruelty cases could gain them entry into homes, like if they write a search warrant based on the animal cruelty case, they might find other things in there, and that they might be stopping other crimes from occurring if they nip it in the bud by just getting a person on animal cruelty. Then I think even the people that might have been a little bit skeptical about, police officers sometimes say, oh, it's just a dog case, or it's just a bird case, that's not why I became a police officer. But when you really explained it, and I think most people, I think it's human nature that when we understand the why behind why we're doing things, then you really get buy-in. And that's really what we do in the B.A.R.C course also. We don't just tell people what the law is and what is required of you as an animal owner, but we explain to them why. So anyway, to answer your question, no, we did not really, there were a few skeptics, but, you know, they hid their skepticism, I think, after a while when they saw their people being so enthusiastic. And it all worked.
It's amazing, just the lengths that you had to go to get this implemented, and that it ended up, taking on kind of its own life. It sounds like, and really caught on, and it's just it really seems like it had like a far-reaching effect. And I was wondering, when you talk about animal cruelty, what is included in that terminology? What would you define as animal cruelty in legal terms?
Well, there are many different forms of animal cruelty. The main two are intentional cruelty, which is where somebody purposely, kicks, burns, stabs an animal. Then there's what I like to call passive cruelty. It's usually called neglect.
Yeah.
And the reason I like to call it passive cruelty is because neglect, before I knew anything about it also, it sounds very benign and like not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like what, you forgot to give them their summer haircut. Oh, you neglected them. But neglect, actually, in my opinion, can actually be a lot worse than the intentional cruelty, because so neglect is failing to provide for an animal, whether it's food, water, shelter, or anything that would cause an animal to suffer physically or psychologically. And the reason I say it's worse is because, let's say if you stab an animal to death, as horrible as that is, that's over maybe in a couple minutes, maybe even less. But an animal who's been neglected severely, they linger, and they suffer really for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes even for years on end.
Yeah.
Got horribly infected teeth. Anybody who's had a toothache knows how horribly painful that is, and also how deadly it could be. A tooth infection can get to the heart and can kill you.
Right.
But we animals that have laid out in people's yard, neighbors have reported hearing that animal. One, I remember they said the animal was yowling
Mm.
for weeks on end, and they finally couldn't stand it, so they called the police. So that's another form. So passive cruelty or neglect. Then there's dog fighting, there's cockfighting, there's leaving an animal in a hot vehicle, although there's no crime. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that there is in California specific crime about that, but that all comes down to, again, the physical suffering that an animal endures as a result of being left in a hot car. Um, hoarding is a form of animal cruelty. Um, the less benign hoarding. So I think those are pretty much the main categories of animal cruelty.
Okay. Well, and that being said, I was amazed when I went through the website, looking at the course and what's involved in it, just the comprehensiveness of the course. It covers everything from like grooming to appropriately addressing separation anxiety, and then also addressing the fact that animals are sentient beings and just everything in between. So, and I was really thrilled to see that you had this section on feelings and emotions and a video, Do Animals Think and Feel, as a part of the course. And then non-domesticated animals, complex emotions and reasoning. So, how did you choose these topics? That's so wonderful that you're getting into these concepts. It's not just it's not just kind of like they need to be walked and fed. There's you went really deep with this course.
Well, the majority of the course is not touchy-feely because that's not. I should mention that this course is only for people. It's by referral only, and we only accept referrals from members of law enforcement, from prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, school administrators, um, and mental health professionals. Although we get very few of those, and this course is we make it very, very clear this course is only designed to be educational. It is not ever to be used instead of or in lieu of mental health counseling or substance abuse counseling. And so it's again, it's used a lot of times, of course, in conjunction with jail, fines, mental health, as I said, substance abuse counseling. But it is not a touchy-feely course because it is being used by the criminal justice system. But we do start off the very beginning of the course, as you mentioned, where we have a whole smaller section on uh, the fact that animals are thinking, feeling beings, and that they
Mm-hmm.
do really suffer. Because there are actually a number of people who don't believe that animals have feelings.
Right.
And that was a concept that was actually taught in veterinary schools, decades ago, that animals didn't need anesthesia because they didn't feel.
Oh.
So the reason we start our courses off with that is because a lot of the people who take our course, um, it's there are different cultures, and when I say cultures, I'm not talking about different nationalities or different countries. I'm talking about different cultures even within the United States.
Mm-hmm.
For example, who might use animals for farming, they might have a little bit of a different take or understanding of what animals think, believe, feel, or should be receiving in the
Mm-hmm.
form of care than somebody who has domesticated animals at home like dogs or cats.
Right.
So we wanted to start it off by letting the people know who didn't realize that animals actually do experience physical pain and suffering, that in fact they do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we chose that. And the rest of the topics were all chosen because for two reasons. One, because there are different legal cases that prosecutors see everywhere. Again, it's the violation of the leash laws, it's the violation of the tethering laws, where you're keeping an animal tied up for long periods of time, which is not only inhumane, but it also can lead to severe harm to the animal. Where we have cases where animals actually, while they're on the tether, will jump up, for example, on top of a car, on top of a dog house, or over a fence and hang themselves.
Ugh. That's actually what
So
happened to my dog. He got caught, his arm got caught on the fence. They left him in the backyard and he wanted to get inside, and he got caught on the fence, dislocated his arm, and they didn't fix it for several weeks until the rescue came and took him. So yeah, I really identify with that one.
Yeah, so the topics are typical legal cases that we see: hoarding and dogfighting and cockfighting, and the forms of abuse we just talked about. And then other ones are about being a responsible pet owner, because even though a lot of the people who take the course receive orders by the court that they're not to own or possess animals or be in contact with animals for a certain period of time, we realize that at some point that order is going to go away and they are going to either have or be around animals. And that really was the whole point of this course. So, um, as a prosecutor, I realized that we were doling out, you know, case dispositions that consisted of fines or jail or prohibition on owning animals, community service, prison. And I thought, none of that, as necessary as some of those things may be in each case, none of that is ever going to change somebody's understanding of what they need to do as pet owners.
Right.
And they're never going to understand why what they did was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so changing their attitude and changing their understanding and changing their knowledge of the law, the hope is that going forward they will not repeat the behavior again. And so that's why I felt an educational component to a criminal sentence is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I realized also that not every criminal case is going to deserve to be filed as a criminal case. I mean, there's some people that do things not out of malice. They're relatively not serious cases. Like they left their dog in a hot car for 20 minutes
Mm-hmm.
and the animal wasn't harmed in any way, but you still need to address that with the person. So rather than filing a criminal case, prosecutors might say that it's called diversion sometimes, like pre-filing diversion, that
Mm-hmm.
rather than filing a case, we're going to have you take a course. And once you complete the course, we won't file a case, it'll go away, or if a case has been filed, once you take the course, then we will dismiss it. So that is why this course was created to begin with, and that's how it's being used now across the country.
Okay. So, are there times? So, if the person does end up in jail, are they taking the course while they're in, before they come out? How does that work?
If they take the course while they're in jail,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do they actually do they go to sentencing, and then while they're in jail, part of the um, plan is that before they're out, they would take the course? Is that like, or is it something they do after? Like,
yeah,
like, is it?
yes, they don't
Okay.
take it. I've never heard of somebody taking it in jail. That would be interesting. I don't I don't know if they have the capability.
Okay.
But just
Mm-hmm.
when you ask about topics, we also cover things like spay and neuter, which in some jurisdictions is the law, but we teach it because we feel that, again, that's a necessary component of being a responsible pet owner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we talk about exercise. You're exercising your animal and playing with your animal, which again is not against the law. A lot of people don't understand why it's not illegal to not walk your dog, but it's not. But we feel that that's something that they should be aware of if you're going to take on an animal.
Yeah.
And we cover things pretty extensively about grooming, and it's because we have seen in the criminal law world that grooming is not a luxury, but what happens to an animal when you don't do certain things, like if you don't brush their hair.
Right.
Long animals, their fur becomes matted. And I remember one to this day, one horrible case of this dog that was matted to the point where its hair had become as hard as a rock, where you actually could knock on it and hear a sound.
Oh yeah.
And that's very heavy. So it was constantly pulling on the dog's skin.
Mm-hmm.
And covered its anus so it couldn't defecate properly.
Oh my gosh.
So, grooming is something that, again, an animal
Yeah.
needs for its own comfort, but it also is that's something that could lead to a criminal case being filed against somebody.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
that's why I'm trying to nip things in the bud and make people aware. So we, as you said, cover you know a lot of things.
Yeah, and just listening to this, I don't know how did you do, What is it like to hear all these cases and be prosecuting them? Like, how do you deal with the emotional side of that as an animal lover?
Mm. Well, it's unpleasant. It really is. And what made it even worse was with the, you know, growing popularity of cell phones. The great thing is that people were starting to actually film things.
Mm-hmm.
Like if neighbor beating their dog, they actually filmed it. And I mean, you can't, pardon the bad pun, you can't beat that as evidence, right? That's
Right.
but as a prosecutor, it's so much harder because rather it's bad enough to read what happened, but all of a sudden now you have to actually watch that.
Oh.
And we had some audio. I won't go into detail about it. Listening to it, it's
Oh.
very it's very painful to listen to.
Yeah.
So, as a prosecutor, what you have to do in order to be effective, and that's again, that's just for animal cases, because I mean, child abuse cases are difficult.
Yeah.
Any case, even adult on adult, is painful when you're watching somebody being
Yeah.
beaten, stabbed. But you have to, in order to be effective, really compartmentalize. I mean, you have to consciously decide that you're not going to become emotional. And I'm not going to lie. I mean, there were a lot of times when I would read a case and I would get I would get upset.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, my blood pressure would go up, and I don't want to say what I said because you can't say it on the air, but in my mind, I'm saying, "What is wrong with you?" to the
Yeah.
defendant. I would just go, "What is wrong with you?" And then I would calm down, and then I would go back to reading it. But
Yeah.
I will say that what I would speak to a lot of law students in law schools who wanted to go into animal cruelty because it's becoming, there are law schools like the Lewis and Clark in Portland
Mm-hmm.
that you can actually get an LLM, an advanced, basically like a master's in law in animal law. So a lot of law students want to get into it. And I would tell them flat out, they would say, I want to get into it because I'm a huge animal lover. I said, well, it might be a problem being a huge animal lover because
Yeah.
you cannot be emotional about this.
Yeah.
You can't constantly be getting upset. And when you become really emotional, you lose your reason, your sense of reasoning. And as prosecutors, probably the number one rule is that you remain objective and fair.
Mm-hmm.
And just because you're really upset about it doesn't mean that what is really a misdemeanor you file as a felony, because that is extremely unethical. And so you cannot get emotionally involved to the point where it affects your ability to be objective and fair as a prosecutor. And that's a tricky thing, and not everybody can do it. And some people started and they said they thought they could do it, and they found out they couldn't do it.
Yeah. I don't think I could. Oh boy. Um, and I have to give you credit for being able to do it because they do need people who can. That's the only. I'm wondering too about the future. Like you said, they do have these schools that are focusing on it, but do you see animal rights going in the right direction, so to speak? Do you feel like more and more laws are coming and that things are opening up, or do you have a sense of the future of animal protection and welfare from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every day the laws are evolving in favor of animals. Like in civil law, you used to be able, let's say a veterinarian kills your dog by performing a bad surgery. So it used to be that all you could get was the value of the dog. Now, if they're anything like my dogs, who I get from the shelter, and I paid like $15 for one because they're basically on their last legs and nobody, they're old and decrepit. They're going to reimburse me, for
Right.
depreciation. I might have gotten a dollar for them. The, the case law, because that's how laws evolve. Every time a case is decided, the new laws are made, in addition to having new legislation. So it's either legislation or through cases where a judge decides something, and then it becomes a precedent, which you can use in future cases. Well, all of a sudden now in civil law, more and more they're recognizing that animals have sentimental value.
Mm.
So it's much how much that dog cost.
Okay.
But recognizing that it has intrinsic value and sentimental value. And as I said, even legal laws now, there, laws, while I was doing it, we would change about holding evidence animals, which was a huge problem. Police officers are used to collecting inanimate objects as evidence, like knives and,
Mm-hmm.
forks and that type of thing. They'd collect a live animal as evidence, and then everybody would forget about the animal because we're just not used to having to worry about the evidence, right? It can sit there for 5 years, a knife can, and who cares, right? The worst that could happen is it might become a little bit rusty. But we had animals sitting in shelters for up to 2 years sometimes.
Oh, wow.
They weren't being walked because the shelter felt that it's an evidence animal. They didn't want to, break the chain of custody or whatever, be accused of somehow,
Oh,
you know. So laws about that now are coming into place,
oh my
and it
gosh.
really takes prosecutors or animal control professionals to understand that certain laws need to be changed, and then going and advocating, and it helps a lot when there are already laws in place in other states, because then you can point to that and say, hey, California has this law, we should too.
Mm.
So I just see the laws getting better and better and better for animals pretty much every year.
Is California pretty much at the head of all of this, or?
I think in a lot of ways it is. In a lot of ways it really is. We've had some groundbreaking laws there. I'll give you one example. Um, California had a law that allowed, my big, pardon the pun, pet peeve was animals being left in hot cars.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that every summer I would dread in LA,
Oh,
summer there, 9 months a year. So
yeah.
for 9 months a year, every time I had to leave my house, I'm thinking, oh, please, dear God, let me not see an animal in a car today. It's just going to, so, and it happened a lot. You'd see it a lot. So awareness again has raised a lot, and people are much more savvy about that. But the law said that if an animal was in a hot car, only law enforcement had the ability or the right to break a window to get, or to jimmy a lock or whatever, to forcibly go in to remove that animal.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought selfishly, well, I would like to be able to, if push came to shove, if it was really, really, really bad,
Yeah.
and people were afraid to do it. I mean, some people would. You see these YouTube videos of people being heroes, but most people didn't because they were afraid of either being criminally charged with vandalism
Yeah.
or being sued by the pet owner, and that there would be civil liability. So as much as they would want to do it, they were afraid to do it. And so I wrote a piece of legislation, and the LA County DA's office was absolutely amazing in supporting every piece of animal legislation that I asked them to support. And that meant a lot at the legislative level, having such a large office supporting, because my office is very well respected. So I wrote a piece of legislation that would amend that would say that civilians had the right to break in to a car to get an animal out, as long as a number, and the only reason it passed with flying colors was because we put a lot of steps in there that had to be followed before you do it. You just can't walk by
Okay.
and start smashing. The animal had to be in serious imminent danger of bodily harm. You had to call 911. You had to stay at the vehicle. You had to give the animal over to animal control or whoever requested it. You only could use as much force as was legally necessary to save the animal. So with those steps in place, it was a very responsible law. And
Mm-hmm.
so California amended the law and now allows civilians to do it. And so I felt a lot better about leaving my house on a personal level when it was hot out, knowing that, oh, and the biggest part was you could not be held civilly liable or be charged with a crime if you followed those steps. That was the big.
Okay. Um, I think that's now. I'm pretty sure I could be wrong. Nobody follow what I'm saying. Look it up. But I, I thought we had it now, like in this part of the country too. Like I'm in New Jersey and New York State. Like I think
Yeah, sure you do,
it
because
really took over.
this was a while. This was, I don't know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe a little longer.
So they probably pointed to California and said, California does this. Why don't we? Yeah, that's
Yeah, and whatever
great.
it had time, but yeah. So, like I said, it's very easy. It's much easier to get a law passed when another state. The legislators aren't so nervous then about kind of going out on a limb and doing something that could be seen as a little bit, you know, risky or cuckoo.
Yeah. um, and going back to the course itself, how did you go about helping the people who are watching the class really kind of process that animals have thoughts and feelings? Do you go into the science of it, or how do you? Um,
No, so we start off at the beginning, that section about animals, sentient beings, and there's also another part of it where we have a lot of, I don't remember how many scenarios there are, maybe 10 or 12, and it's basically causing the reader or the student to put themselves in the shoes of the animals, or
Okay.
the hooves of the animals. For example, there's one little scenario, and so what we ask them is, after we give the scenario, what could this person have done better for the animal? And then we give them a selection of answers. And one scenario was, Bingo's been waiting all day long for his owner to come home. He can't get to the backyard. He's been having to go to the bathroom he's been having to pee and we use language, that's not highfalutin or legal. So been having to
Okay.
pee really badly for the last few hours, and he's dying to get out and get some exercise. He finally hears the key in the lock. Jill is home, and he's so excited and thrilled. He's going to get to go pee, and he's going to get to go outside where he hasn't been for the last 12 hours. And Jill runs up the steps right past him, pats Bingo on the head, changes into her gym clothes, and runs out the door. And he's just sitting there,
Oh,
devastated, because now he can't go out to pee or to exercise. And we say, what could Jill have done better? And then
okay.
we say, you know, Jill could have taken Bingo for a walk before she went to the gym. She could run with him instead of going to the gym. So, so it's all about placing the student in in place of the animal, so that they start to see things through the eyes of the animal. So that's one of the ways that we get them to start thinking about animals, you know, as sentient beings, as you said.
And what are the majority of the cases that you get? Are they, you said, I think you might have said that they're more like the neglect, but are there specific things that just come up more than others?
Yeah, it's intentional cruelty and neglect are the biggest ones, or the passive cruelty. And in the passive cruelty ones, I would say it's people who didn't take their animals to a vet when the animal was really sick, and just let them linger there. And we're talking about, like severe injuries or severe illness that they didn't address and didn't take. Like the animal might have a cancerous tumor, or not even a cancerous tumor. The tumor grew and grew and grew and grew to the point where it's like this large, and it's, you know, I don't want to go into graphic detail, but it's
Yeah, you've seen them, yeah.
leaking. So that's very typical. The failure to provide veterinary care. We have a lot of cases, unfortunately, of people who don't feed their animal properly, and the animal gets to the point where they either die of starvation. Like they'll leave them out in the backyard,
Mm.
and they'll go away for a week or two and not feed the animal, or have somebody in to care about them, or they leave them in an apartment when they move, and the animal starves to death. And then we have a good amount of the intentional cruelty ones, where
You
people
do.
have done really bad things. We had a lot of depending on parts of the country, a lot of animals in hot vehicles. Mm.
I guess, I guess I try to. I deal with so many people who, in my business as an animal communicator, so many people are like wanting to do anything they can to help their animals, and you kind of think, well, it must just be people are ignorant, when they end up in these situations with, not that I'm naive. I mean, I know that there's definitely people who do intentionally harm animals, but you want to believe it's like few and far between. But it doesn't sound like it from what you're saying. That it's probably a lot more than we want to think. Uh, with those cases, where if someone's intentionally harming them, it seems like this is a great course. Do they? But you said that they do sometimes also have them go for additional counseling. There's other things they put in place.
Yeah, well, again, that's entirely up to the prosecutor. I'm not a prosecutor at this point in my career. It's up to them to decide everything that they're going to include in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, they they sometimes they should be including things. Like I said, if somebody has a substance abuse problem, and the reason that they say that they did what they did is because they were high on meth, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
the hope is that a prosecutor would include, as part of their probation or as part of their diversion, attend, either in not in house, but a live-in program
Uh-huh.
that
Yeah.
it would address all of the factors that have gone into creating the behavior. A lot of times that what they need is, and we would do this all the time in animal cruelty cases, and I know that they still do in the LADA's office, is anger management.
Okay.
Because a lot of times they're just really angry, and I mean, just like it's the same type of thing where they're taking it out on a child or a more vulnerable victim, like a a smaller female or a child or a smaller male or whatever the case is. They have anger issues,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
the animal just happens to be the handy target, either once or on a regular basis. So that person's anger definitely needs to be addressed.
Right.
I mean, of course, again, it educates, but it's not a cure at all for underlying psychological or mental or
Yeah.
physical issues.
Um, you did have something on your website where I know I couldn't see it because I didn't have access to the course, but it mentioned dogfighting from a reformed dogfighter's point of view. Was that somebody who took the course, or was that just somebody that that you had some contact with and spoke about somehow having changed from having been somebody who had dogs fighting?
Right. So yeah, it's a person who used to dogfight and came to the realization that it was extremely wrong, kind of had an epiphany, starting to understand why it was wrong. And in our dogfighting section, as with all of these sections, again, we explain the why. So the dogfighting is a pretty lengthy section, and it explains the impact. You know, so we produced, I think, 26 original videos because this course is what I like to call kind of in Hollywood business, they say edutainment,
Uh huh.
or it's educational, but I'm not saying it's humorous, but we definitely included some videos that were, you know, interesting and
Yeah, well, that's
educating.
smart. Keep people's attention. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like we have, we did one like a man on the street for the spay neuter, and in the dog fighting, we talked about we did a myth busting section on the dog fighting because a lot of people believe, in certain countries and cultures, dog fighting is perfectly acceptable. So is cockfighting. It's kind of a cultural thing, and it's acceptable, becoming less acceptable. And so we were explaining in the myth busting, we went through all these different myths. Myth number one, the dogs enjoy it. They were bred to fight and they really enjoy it. Well, we explained, well, why that's not really the case. They don't have a choice human boxers do. Um, we're just trying to think, we have like 10 different myths in there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but so it's in all of these videos and in the dog fighting, the cockfighting, again, it's explaining to them just not that it's illegal. Because if you tell somebody it's illegal and they still want to do it because they're not getting why they shouldn't do it, they're going to do it. They're going to find a more hidden place next time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we're just hoping that they come to understand and
Mm-hmm.
that they want to do it.
Did that individual come to that realization just through the course, or did it take some
But
other
it
interventions? Or
has nothing to do with the course. This is just somebody who, is kind of a speaker now about
got it.
dogfighting,
Okay, got it.
do it, and why he no longer does it. Kind of his light bulb moment.
Mm.
And I think the moment was his own personal dog, who he really loved, kind of bled out in front of him.
Oh, okay.
It made him. It brought it home to him. That this is not just like a
Right,
machine fighting, but this was you know Dodger or whatever the dog's name was.
right, okay. And
So
yeah, and by the way, people who are here, in the chat, feel free to, if you have any questions, we are going to have some Q&A. You could post those if you do, or any comments. And if this show is, if this is interesting and educational for you, please do like and subscribe. I do appreciate those of you who have been liking. Thank you. So, what is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is, just important for people to understand about B.A.R.C, or anything to do with, animal protection, animal cruelty?
I would like to tell people that whenever they can, if they see something, I would really encourage them to report. I know in the past people have reported before this has become kind of much more that law enforcement's become much more aware. I think people, a lot of times, the ones that did care, that have cared for decades, became discouraged about reporting because they felt like nothing was being done. And I have to admit that a lot of cases, nothing was being done.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you feel like that now, things have changed, I would really encourage you to please speak up, because animals cannot do anything for themselves. If you see an animal in a hot car, don't just walk by, call mall security, call 911. You can remain anonymous if you want, give as much information as possible, but animals cannot speak for themselves. And it's really a hidden crime. It's just like, child abuse. If a child is at home and it's happening, and let's say they're homeschooled and they're not out and about where they can talk, or they're too young to tell anybody, an animal is exactly the same way. So if you do report and you feel like you're kind of being brushed off, be a squeaky wheel. Be nice. Don't be, nasty to law enforcement, because to be honest with you, a lot of times law enforcement truly does not know. They don't know that there are laws on the books and that they can do something. And once you explain to them, I mean, worst comes to worst, you can Google the law in your jurisdiction and say, hey, I just happened to look it up, and you know what? There actually is a law in the books. I didn't know that. Wow. And then once they're empowered and they know they can do something. So I would really encourage people to report whenever they can, in a way that's safe for them, and not to do anything that would ever jeopardize their safety. Like if they feel like it's not safe to film with their phone, don't ever do anything that you feel might put you in harm's way.
Okay. Are there any hopes that you have for B.A.R.C, for the future of B.A.R.C?
Yes. So my biggest hope is that animal services professionals will start to use it more. Animal services have 90% of them, 95% of them in this country have a law enforcement section arm, where they have humane officers who are going out and actually enforcing the animal cruelty laws. And having worked with animal control so often, I know that animal control officers in the field don't have a lot of time to educate, especially in busy cities. I mean, they have calls backed up. So they can't stand there for 10 or 15 minutes educating an owner about why they should be feeding their animal, why they should be keeping them in a clean area. And a lot of times, again, it doesn't rise to the level of something that should be cited civilly or filed on criminally, because there might not be enough evidence, or that's not what it deserves. A person just needs education. My hope was always that animal service professionals would start sending people to an educational class instead, whether it's B.A.R.C or any other course, so that they're educating people. And sadly, unfortunately, while prosecutors and probation officers are using B.A.R.C a lot around the country, for some reason, animal service professionals have not really become aware or understand how they can use B.A.R.C. So my hope is that they would start using it a lot more in the field, because there are thousands of cases out there every single day where somebody just needs to be educated. Whether, again, it's through B.A.R.C, it doesn't matter. Local humane societies sometimes classes, so it'd be great to see them using the educational tool more often.
Do they have any leeway if, say, an officer goes out, there's something that, like you said, it doesn't rise to the level of you can't put the person under arrest, or it can't be prosecuted. At that point, is it just a matter of them saying, like, hey, I think it would be great if you watch this thing, and there's no way for them to force the person to do it if it's not a legal matter, if it doesn't become a legal matter?
That's absolutely correct. They can't force anybody, but what they could do, for example, is to say, hey, listen, you know what, I could cite you. You're in violation of Municipal Code Section 222 and 999 and 20 other ones. But I'm going to give you a choice. I could write you a citation and you can pay the fines, or if you like, you can take a course.
Okay. Yeah.
So there you have. And I just want to point one thing out, because you'd said watching the course. It's more than watching. There is a quiz after every class. There's 16 classes. They have to take a quiz and pass it with 100% before they can move on to the next class. And then at the end, there's a final exam which covers the entire curriculum. And they have to pass that final exam with a minimum of 80% in order to pass the class.
It's wonderful.
And then different quizzes throughout, again, not just end of chapter.
Right.
It's a very interactive course, and it's reinforced by testing their knowledge.
How do you think the word can get out there more about B.A.R.C? I mean, do you encourage people to just, contact their local humane society, or or their local animal control, or, to let them know about it in case they don't? Or how How do people find out about this? How do different law enforcement agencies and across the country hear about it?
So a lot of it is word of mouth, and a lot of prosecutors, we've seen a real uptick in the courses because well, people want to do things online now, and this course is completely online. And the beauty of that is a lot of people who have been charged or convicted of animal cruelty, in order to go to classes, in-person classes, they'd have to take time off of work, and a lot of people really can't afford to lose a day or more days of work. So it's all online. So they're finding out about it more and more through word of mouth. Like one probation officer in their department has a case and they sent the person to B.A.R.C, and another probation officer say, God, I got this animal case, I don't know what to do with it. And they'll say, oh, I use this course. And a lot of prosecutors now are becoming a lot more wanting to add an educational component. So a lot of people are just Googling animal cruelty classes or courses.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Do you recommend people contact their any local law enforcement or anything to do with animal protection to just educate them about it, or is
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. Somebody wanted to call their local prosecutor's office and say, hey, I heard, I'd like to see animal cruelty cases. I would love to see an educational component being added to whatever your case dispositions are.
That's great. Yeah, so that's something we can just do as citizens, to help out, and that's wonderful that it's available. It really is. I encourage people to go just like look around the site because it's quite extensive. Very very amazing and innovative what you put together. I really was amazed by everything that's excuse me, that's involved in the class. You really put so much thought into it. And if there are any questions, I don't see anybody in the posting any questions. Well, I wonder, is there anything else that we missed that you feel like we need to touch on before I let you go? I know you have a commitment this evening too, but.
Yeah, just quickly, I want to say, because I'm sure there are a lot of animal lovers who are watching this, some people get upset when they hear that an animal abuser might have to take a course because they feel that that's not sufficient. And I completely understand that. I mean, we obviously want to see people, suffer the consequences of mistreating an animal. But I have to say that we have to be very, very realistic about a couple things. One is a lot of judges are not willing to impose, for example, jail time or prison time. It's getting better, but realistically speaking, we're not going to get jail in a lot of cases. We're not going to get prison in a lot of cases. But even in the cases where we do, to be realists, we have to really want true rehabilitation, in my opinion at least, is doing something to change somebody's future behavior. And I don't know if a course is going to do it, but I will say that it's really great to at least try.
Right.
Because it's really better than nothing.
Right.
So, being realistic means that we have to kind of come down a little bit and say they're not going to get the death penalty. They're not going to get 20 years of hard labor breaking rocks, while they're on a chain gang. They may not even go to jail or prison, depending on which courtroom they end up in around the country. And so we have to really kind of, I don't want to say take what we can get, because I don't feel like this is like grasping, this is just like, oh, well, this is just, pardon the bad pun again, throwing somebody a bone. But really, education is a real way, just like a domestic violence person. They're required in most, if not all states, to take a batterer's course when of domestic violence. And it's the same principle. So I would just really urge people that if they're thinking that a course is kind of like a lot of hooey in a case that involves abusing an animal, we'd like to see stronger sentences in some parts of the country or different courtrooms, but this hopefully will have some impact on a person so that in the future they will either think before they do it. Maybe they won't get an animal, which is cases, right? Not everybody should have an animal. So.
Right, and that's in there. I mean, I remember seeing that. It says like, should you have an animal? That's one of the sections in the course is.
Exactly.
Or should you get more animals than you already have? Let's think about that. Some people they keep getting more and more and can't afford them, and or don't want to invest whatever is needed to be invested in them, even if they can.
Exactly. And that's where the trouble starts for them. You know, good intentions, but you get overwhelmed. It's expensive to feed a lot of animals. It takes time to exercise all those animals.
Yep.
Veterinary, as you know, is a fortune.
Yep.
So, about the reality in one of the sections about having more than one animal, what that means for you, and how that could end badly for you legally,
Right.
and badly for the animal, of course.
Yeah. And are veterinarians? I mean, I probably know this, and I'm not really thinking of exactly what the process is, but it's somewhere in my memory. But veterinarians have some kind of duty to report. You know, obviously, at some level where they're thinking an animal's been abused. But do you know where like the line is with that? Does it vary by state to state?
It does vary by state, and in most, if not all states, then a veterinarian it's called a mandated reporter,
Yeah.
or mandated reporters of child abuse.
Right.
Um, California animal control officers are mandated reporters of child abuse because the law recognizes that when you go in on an animal abuse case, it's, you know, there's a good possibility you may see child abuse.
Yeah.
So yes, veterinarians are mandated reporters in a lot, if not all, states, and at least in California, it says that they're mandated reporters of suspected animal cruelty. So if they suspect that it might be cruelty to it might so injury might have been caused by, you know, intentional infliction of some type of physical force, or if they believe that the neglect that they're seeing rises to the level of a crime, suspected animal cruelty, yes, they're mandated to report it, and if they don't report it, they actually can be charged with a misdemeanor.
Okay.
And if they report it in good faith, suspected animal cruelty, they are not going to be held civilly liable.
Oh, okay. You know, and I was also just curious. I don't know if you know have the funding to do this, but have you been able to do any follow-up work or studies just to see if there's been any repeat offending, if that's gone down from people taking the course?
So we have not done a longitudinal study. We would like to at some point. We have not really been in existence long enough to get any type of meaningful statistics, but it would also require being able to access people's criminal
Yeah.
history.
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to access criminal histories unless you have a legitimate law enforcement purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So, at the point that we will do it, we will have to rely upon the cooperation of a prosecutor, if they're even able to divulge that.
Okay.
So,
Interesting.
because again, you can't access willy-nilly people's criminal histories.
Yeah.
And there's criminal abuse registry like there is for sex offenders, so you might be able to look somebody up online to see if they were convicted of a sex offense.
Yeah.
At least in most states, I don't think animal abuse registries have passed yet. So I know a lot of states are working on that, where members
Mm-hmm.
of the public are able to know, like especially like rescue groups or shelters, before they adopt an animal out, they'd be able to check the registry to see if somebody has a
Mm.
conviction for animal cruelty.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's
Yeah, that's a little bit of a controversial law, but it has passed, I think, in at least a couple or a few. People could look that up on the Animal Legal Defense Fund, ALD.
mm-hmm.
Really
Yeah,
great
they've been
about.
on this show. Yep.
That's
Yeah,
it.
they're great. I've had them on the show a couple times, so you know, check them out and watch the show where they were on too, because they have some really interesting stuff coming up, like the courtroom advocacy program
Yeah,
that they're. Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. Having an attorney to represent the animals side in court is wonderful.
right. Yeah, that's a great group.
Yeah, they're wonderful.